Okay, after a general discussion on authentication and its evolution over time, some discussion of roles, what we're going to talk about here is authentication in sharded clusters and some of the intricacies that arise as a result of the fact that you're deploying in a sharded cluster. A couple of notes before we start. First of all, I'm going to be mainly talking about 2.4 and below, but I will reference 2.6. Because in this particular scenario, 2.6 is actually a simpler solution. So I'll explain the more complex version of things in 2.4, and then I'll refer back to 2.6 and the changes therein. Okay, so a couple of other notes just to sort of refresh everybody's memory. The first thing is that in any sharded cluster, we're going to have our config servers, and it's production, so there will be 3 of them. Okay, and the config DB lives here. If you cast your mind back to our discussion about sharded clusters in general, you'll remember this is where the config database is where the shard metadata information lives, settings for the sharded cluster in general, and other metadata about the cluster. So that's where it lives on the config servers. So quite important already, but as we'll show you, even more important when it comes to an authenticated sharded environment. And then just to reiterate, we have database users, in other words, per database user. So every time you add a user to a particular database, you're adding into that database only. The sort of exception to that rule is the admin database, which gives you access to all the rest. It's kind of your super user access. Now, the admin database is simply a database as well, but it's your special case. So those are our 2 sort of different user groups. All right, so let's draw this out. Okay, so here's a diagram similar to ones that we've seen before. 3 shard cluster, primary, secondary in each one. So these are all replica sets here, and of course we have our MongoOS up here at the top. Now, all of your administrative work should be done on the MongoOS itself. So you will be doing your add users, remove users, and everything else through here. So the admin commands will be done on the MongoOS. And there is one thing that we're kind of forgetting, which we'll draw over here to the side. Those are our config servers. So we've got 3 shards, our config servers, 3 replica sets, and our config cluster over there. So representing a sort of standard sharded cluster. You can have multiple MongoOSs, obviously, but we'll just use one in terms of a logical presentation. Okay, so when you create a database, so let's say we type in use shard test, which is what we were using earlier, and you insert some data. You start using that database and everything else. You insert data into a collection on that database. What's going to actually happen there when you create that database is the MongoOS is going to pick one of these shards for that database to live on, whether you shard it or not. So even if you never actually enable sharding, shard a collection on there, the MongoOS has to pick one of these for that database to live on. So in this case, shard 1, and actually what I'll do is I'll actually change the names of these shards because I'm going to refer back to our test shard that's actually running. So let's have a quick look at that, and you can see the names on our shards here are RS0, RS1, RS2. So let's actually draw that in. So you have test RS0, RS1, and RS2. Now, of course, in our test environment, these are all running, and so is the MongoOS, and indeed the config server is all running on the same host. So what I've actually done is created 2 databases. I created shard test earlier on, and that's what we were using, and you can actually see, if you refer back here, you can actually see the chunks that are on there. So 133 chunks we managed to create across those 3 shards, and they're split out amongst them at the moment. And the other thing that I did was just a couple of minutes ago was I created another one called auth test. Okay. Now, when I created this auth test database, and I just inserted 1 record into it, the MongoOS, and I was doing it through here, so I did use auth test, and then I did db.foo insert, and I put in a document. It doesn't really matter what the document is. Ran those commands in the MongoOS. Now, MongoOS had to pick one of these databases for it to live on. It can't just stay on the MongoOS. It has to be persisted somewhere. It has to live somewhere in the database itself, or on a database itself. So what did the MongoOS choose for me when I did this? Let's have a look. Well, here we have it. This is auth test. This is the new database that I added just a few minutes ago. Partition false means that it has not been sharded. You can see that our shard test earlier on, which is split up into chunks, is partition true. So this is partition false. It's not sharded. However, you do have this other field over here, which I believe I've referenced, but not going into detail about what it means, except perhaps when talking about draining a shard earlier on. So in this case, the primary is test-rs0. So for shard test, the primary database lives on test-rs0. So that's where shard test lives, and any other collections that are on there. Now shard test just has the one collection, which is foo, and that actually has been split across all three. So you'll find that collection here, here, and here. Okay, so because that has been split across, you'll find it in all three databases. Okay, so it doesn't seem like the primary was terribly important there. Let's see what happened with auth test. So in auth test's case, it's not sharded, so data hasn't been distributed to multiple shards, and its primary is test-rs1. So let's do that one in red. Just to be consistent, what I'll just do is redraw that in blue. And just to stop things from getting confusing, I'm going to call them primary shards instead of primary databases. That's a bit of a holdover from my own previous attempts to explain this to people. I always refer to it as a primary database, which of course can cause problems when you're talking about primaries and secondaries in other contexts. So we'll call it a primary shard for shard test. So auth test is the primary shard of rs1. So you'll have shard test of foo across all of them. Now, if I do something quite simple, and what we're going to do here is we've switched to the shard test database, our pre-existing database that of course has the foo collection sharded across all three shards, and I'm going to do an insert on this bar collection here using the sort of standard random variables foo and bar. db.bar.insert, and just, it doesn't really matter what the document is, we're just doing it for illustrative purposes. So I've done that. Now let's have a look at our sh.status. You'll notice here that nothing's changed. We have a shard test.foo being listed, but no shard test.bar. Why is that?